It always amazes me when I can pull out some crazy idea of what I might want to talk about, and Dedry finds the perfect music for it. So thank you, my friend. Because when I contacted Dedry earlier in the week, and I said, this week I'm going to talk about the difference between courage and bravery. Because we use those words interchangeably. If you've been coming for a while, you've heard me talk about how we kind of get sloppy with our language. We're not really clear about the words we use. And we know in unity how important our language is, right? Because our language represents our thoughts. Our thoughts, when we align those with divine ideas, when we align those with divine mind, we get to help change and shape our experience here of this material world. And this came up for me because last week a friend sent me a video, an interview with Julia Butterfly Hill. Does anyone remember Julia Butterfly Hill? I see a couple people nodding. In 1997, she climbed a 200-foot redwood tree that was more than 1,000 years old. She thought she was going to be up there for a couple days, maybe 2 weeks, and she ended up being on that tree for 2 years and 8 days, trying to save this 1,000-year-old redwood tree. 2 years and 8 days. Can you imagine living on like a little, I don't know how big the platform was, but it couldn't have been that big. But she was 180 feet up in the air. And in this interview, she said this, and it moved me. The root word for courage is cor, from the French, which means heart. There's a big difference between bravery and courage. Interestingly, courage only happens when we come up against fear, overwhelm, anxiety, depression, hopelessness, rage. She says she raged a lot because she loves deeply, which means she gets angry deeply. She continued, my job then through love is to find a way through it. And when I find a way through it, through the fear, through the anxiety, the overwhelm, the depression, when she moves through it, she transforms it and courage happens. See, Julia was clear in her interview that had she seen what was coming, she couldn't have done it. Right? People go, I couldn't have stayed up in a tree for 2 years. Well, she's like, well, when I climbed up there, I didn't know I was going to be there for 2 years. I couldn't have done it either. So I started diving in, and courage is the ability to do something that frightens us. Courage is strength in the face of pain and grief. Do you see anything that could cause you pain or grief in the world today? Is anybody frightened today of something? So see, we get to step into this idea of courage. And courage it comes from the Latin cor, which then became courage in French, and in Middle English, courage. We have courage when we experience strength in the face of our pain, our grief, our frightened experience. And see, we use this word bravery today to mean the same thing, but I looked up bravery, and bravery originally meant bravado and challenge and audacity. And see, in the mid-16th century, bravado, from the Latin barbarus, which meant savagely cruel, exceedingly brutal, primitive, and uncivilized. And when we were talking about brave language, we meant that it was coarse and unrefined. So it's curious to me that we now use these these words interchangeably because clearly in bravery, fear is not present. Right? You don't need, you can be brave and do that double dog dare. Remember that when you were little? The double dog dare? Eating a bug or, I don't know, what would they do in the movie, The Double Dog Dare? They stuck their tongue to the frozen pole, right? A double dog dare. There's no fear present. There's, bravado. There's this incredibly big ego present when we are being brave. And so what I've learned this week as I dived into this idea of courage is that courage entails a cause. Right? Courage, which means heart in Latin and in French. Heart, it involves love, it involves our passion, it involves our compassion, our concern. Our concern that could lead us to climb 180 feet into the air and live on a platform. And see, bravery maintains its essence without a cause. So what is your cause? Right? The very beginning of this year, you wrote a letter. You made a commitment. What is your cause? What are you here to experience? What are you here to express? And do you have the courage to do that? See, courage is the result of our mindfulness. It is our decision to fight, to go on, to persevere. It is our decision to pull forth our faculty of strength despite our fears. Yes? So then I bet somebody's wondering, how does this idea of courage fit into our exploration of will this month? Is anybody wondering that? Or you're like, no, we're done with will, Todd. We're not done with will. See, the relationship of will to all of our other faculties invites us to look at this idea of courage. And to illustrate this, I want to talk about the relationship between King Darius and Belteshazzar. Belteshazzar. And some of you are wondering, okay, who are these people, Todd? Right? Does anybody remember? So Darius seized power when Belshazzar was killed. But see, Belshazzar was the king, and Belshazzar had inherited the throne from his father, Nebuchadnezzar. Are any of these names starting to sound familiar? Those people that were toting around the Old Testament, the Hebrew Scripture for their youth, they're remembering these names, right? So we're going to look at courage, and we're going to look at Belteshazzar, right? Belteshazzar, he distinguished himself as a wise man. So we have to, we look at this story and we go, okay, I mean, we could dive into the narrative, but I don't want to do that. You can go home and you can read this if you want to. You can read it online. I want to talk about the metaphysics of it. We'll share a little bit of the story, but the metaphysics, I told you that Nebuchadnezzar was the king. And then he left the throne to his son, Belshazzar, who then died and Darius took power. So Nebuchadnezzar represents, metaphysically, you get this, he represents human will. There's that word again. He represents human will that backs itself up with human intellect. Right? It brings human judgment to the full attention of our material world. Right? What do we know in our own experience when we align our will just with this material world? Right? That's where we have those experiences of being controlling. I know that's just me. Y'all have all healed that. But it's that control thing, that Nebuchadnezzar, that human will that is backed up by what we think right? The ego thinking. And then when Nebuchadnezzar dies and Belshazzar takes over the throne, right? This represents metaphysically the son attempting to rule consciousness without appealing to God for right judgment. There's that word that shows up over and over again when I talk, consciousness. Right? How often do we attempt to force our will with our human intentions without seeking any kind of understanding, without any kind of judgment, without opening up to the wisdom where we know that we know that we know? And then Darius who takes control after Belshazzar dies. Darius represents the ruling ego of sense consciousness that recognizes the value of our spiritual judgment. So see, in this narrative, we have these three kings who are expanding in consciousness, yes? We see this expansion from victim to victor to vessel. Those expansions of consciousness that we, by learning to control our thoughts, by learning to use our executive faculty of will to take charge of and move forward with all of our other faculties, we move towards verity. So we're talking and looking at Belteshazzar. And see, this is the servant, and his name means whom the Lord protects. Whom the Lord protects. Now, here's the interesting thing to me is Belteshazzar. It's not an easy name to say, right? His true name, right? Because that is a name that he was given by Nebuchadnezzar, right? Because Nebuchadnezzar had gone to war and had captured some people and brought them back, and then he elevated some of them, the ones that were the smartest, and so the smartest one that he found, he changed this guy's name to Belteshazzar. And so Belteshazzar was an Israelite who was known as Daniel. And see, and when we start talking about Daniel, people go, oh, I've heard of Daniel, right? Daniel and the lion's den. And see, Daniel represents spiritual judgment, conscious integrity. So Daniel had distinguished himself. See, when Daniel came in and joined the land of Nebuchadnezzar and his kingdom, the king said, okay, I want you to pick out the smartest people, and then I want you to feed them what I'm feeding all of the other, feed them what I'm feeding everyone in the court. And then the smartest and the strongest bring to me. So Daniel goes, oh, yeah, we don't want to eat that. We don't, that's not in alignment with who we are. We don't want to eat that. We want to eat fruits and vegetables. And so he made a deal with one of the guards. And so Daniel and three of his friends, they got to eat the fruit and the vegetables. And the deal was, you let us eat this, and then you get to take a look and see who's the strongest. And they actually ended up being stronger than what everyone else was being fed in the kingdom. And so he becomes protected by God because he lives into his own faith. He eats not of the material consciousness, but of truth. Yes? And so Daniel becomes a great prophet and an interpreter of dreams and makes a name for himself, and he lives justly. And And through three different kings, kings again represent the will, the executive faculty. Three different kings are really impressed with Daniel. Right? They're really impressed. And so finally, Darius, he says, hey, you're really trustworthy. You've got a good head on your shoulders. You clearly have an incredible amount of wisdom. So I'm going to let you manage the entire kingdom. So here we have this Israelite who is in charge of the entire kingdom and managing everything for King Darius. Now, who here has ever been the teacher's pet or your boss's favorite? I see a couple people waving at me. I was too. I know that's hard to believe. Right? But I've also had that experience where a lot of us, we're like, oh, I am not the teacher's pet. I'm not the boss's favorite. Has anybody had that experience? Yeah, and so what shows up for us when that happens? We can get a little bit jealous, right? We can be a little bit envious. And so this is what happens. See, all of the other leaders that were jealous of Daniel, they say, we shall not find any ground for complaint against this Daniel unless we find it in connection with the law of his God. Right? See, King Darius was not an Israelite. He did not bow down to the God of Abraham. And so these men, okay, this is at a time in history where there was a belief that rulers were the embodiment of their deity, right? And so this is what they do. So this group of people conspired and came to the king and said to him, "O King Darius, live forever. All the presidents of the kingdom, the prefects and the satraps, the counselors and the governors are agreed that the king should establish an ordinance and enforce an interdict that whoever prays to anyone, divine or human, for 30 days, except to you, O king, shall be thrown into a den of lions." So these people are so jealous, the only thing they can come up with that's going to get Daniel punished and out of power is to get this edict signed. So, of course, will that is not necessarily always under the influence of spiritual understanding and spiritual wisdom and judgment, right? That can be swayed, right? And so the king establishes this edict. He signs the document so that it cannot be changed. And so guess what happens? Daniel is a faithful man. In Scripture, we read that Daniel prays 3 times a day. 3 times a day. He is devoted to his faith tradition. 3 is a very distinct number because, see, 3 has a metaphysical interpretation, as does everything. And so we know that the number 1 represents unity. We know that the number 1 represents there is only one power, one presence that is everywhere equally present in consciousness. And then we have 2, and 2 represents duality. 2 represents this idea that there is a separation, right? Now, we know that separation's not real. And so we come to the number 3. 3 represents harmony. It is the harmony of wisdom and understanding. It is the synthesis of our spirituality and our humanity. 3 integrates the I am with our body, with our physical presence. And so Daniel prays 3 times a day. And he gets caught. And guess what happens? He gets thrown into the lion's den. Now, King Darius was not happy about this because he realized that he had been tricked. And he says, we got to do this because I signed this piece of paper, and so this has to happen now. I can't go back on my word. But hopefully, your God will save you. So Daniel goes into the lion's den, and King Darius goes off, and he doesn't eat that night. He fasts. And then he returns the next morning and calls out for Daniel, and Daniel is still alive. Because the Lord God Almighty held closed the mouths of the lions. See, this is something that was written in 1916 by Charles Fillmore. This is a message that our founder delivered. The will is the image and likeness of God and is regarded by all mystics as the central spark that links man to the supreme. The will, the king, naturally loves the good, the true, and therefore it is the friend of right judgment, Daniel. But having in ignorance sent forth an act that puts this faculty to a severe test, will is worried and affirms that the God of Daniel shall deliver him. This is a correct handling of the situation. When we do that which puts us to the test along any line, we should declare the divine deliverance and power at work. This sets into action through forces that may be described as the angel who shuts the lion's mouth. We can use our will at any moment and move in the wrong direction. We can be swayed by our appetites and our passions, our desire to be worshiped. Or we can have courage, that ability to do something that frightens us, that gives us strength in the face of pain. See, we know, we've talked about it here before, that the only thing that we are really afraid of is that it's true that we are powerful beyond measure. See, we know here at Unity that lack is an illusion. That fear is nothing but a distraction that pulls us away from love. Right? Love, that place in the heart, that place where courage is born. This week, I invited everyone that's participating in our prayer discussion group, our book study, to make a commitment to pray every day. They got to pick how long they were going to pray, and they were going to give themselves a start date and a stop date. And I want to invite all of you to do that same thing today. Because see, the important part about Daniel's story in the lion's den is not that Daniel went into the lion's den and came out because God saved him. Because see, that is an interpretation from victim consciousness because something happened to Daniel. But when we expand our consciousness and we recognize that Daniel prayed 3 times a day, he kept his alignment to truth. He turned his direction to God, good, love, multiple times a day. So that when something bad happened, he was already prepared. And I just asked you all a few minutes ago, is there anything now that maybe brings up some fear that frightens you? Is there anything that causes you concern? Is there anything that makes you feel separate from? And a lot of people nodded yes. And so I invite you, step back into prayer. Step back into prayer. Because, see, our prayer aligns us with the truth of who we are. God, good, love, present now. You know, in that incredible experience of being a spiritual being, having this incredible human experience in this amazing world where we have been called now. Right? The I am that I am is calling us here now to be present, to have courage, to make a difference in this world. So the slide here, and I'll get it online for everyone as well. This is an actual picture of Luna. Hill's efforts saved Luna. She actually ended up with an agreement. The group she was working with to save this tree. I mean, it's not that she was just saving this tree. See, this company had already clear cut a forest, and where they clear cut the forest, there was a landslide, and it took out 7 homes. And killed some people. And then the company came back and they were going to clear cut some more. So, Julia Butterfly Hill climbed to this tree and lived there for 2 years and 8 days, and then finally came to an agreement where they could save this tree and a 200-foot buffer zone around it. So she saved the tree. But our spiritual work continues. It always continues. That's why we call them spiritual practices, right? We have to keep practicing. In November of 2000, an unknown vandal used a chainsaw to cut halfway through that tree. But then in 2001, a group of engineers got together and they created this bracing system that helps that 200-foot tall tree withstand extreme windstorms. Have courage to do what is right today. Be in alignment. Use your will in alignment with your wisdom and your understanding. Because the I am that I am is calling you now to make a difference. Be the presence of God, good love in a world where a lot of people are frightened. By doing so, you make a difference. Namaste, my friends. Namaste. Dedri, will you move us into some quiet space?
In the silence, there is a sacred place, a secret meeting place. Love is there. In the silence, where every color blends and every rainbow ends, good is there. In the light, now you find that you know peace of mind. In the silence, your path is paved in gold, and all your dreams unfold. Love is there. Peace is there. Truth is there. God is there.
So if it's comfortable, take a deep breath and maybe close your eyes. And with the next breath, let your shoulders relax. Let your jaw relax. And just feel the seat supporting you in this space. I will to be the will of God. I will to will the will of God. Through our experience of silence, through our continuous seeking to feel the constant connection we have with divine mind, we can use our wisdom to hold closed the lion's mouth, to not be distracted by material sense consciousness, but to stay here in the presence, where we are the light, where we are the love, where we are the power, where we are the peace. And so now, here in a moment of silence, just breathe. Just breathe. With wisdom and judgment, I use my will. With wisdom and understanding, I use my will and align my will with the will of divine mind. And so it is.